Good morning. Today is the 10th day of Tevet, the 22nd of December. The 10th of Tevet is a fast day, and we even fast on a Friday, and it's well known that this is the day on which the Babylonians first came to Jerusalem. They, as they say, they touched the wall of Jerusalem, and this spelled the beginning of the deterioration of the Jewish people's ability to affect the world, and from then it didn't actually ever recover. If at that time they still had international relations that had an effect, and people came to the temple to perceive the divine presence and so on, from that day and on, it all deteriorated. After 2.5 years, the real siege of Jerusalem began. And then 3.5 years, 3 and almost 4 years later, the first temple was destroyed. We're not going to talk about the 10th of Tevet. We're going to talk about the final reading of Parashat Vayigash. And here, we didn't put this in the wonders because simply wasn't enough room. And I've been alluding to this for the last 2 weeks, that we're going to see something that Joseph did that is simply spectacular. It's very hard to even understand it if it's not pointed out. The dream that Pharaoh had was 7 and 7, 7 cows, 7 bushels. And from that, Joseph explained to him that there was going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. But it's easy to see from the wording that is in our seventh reading, the seventh reading of Vayigash, that there were not 7 years, there were actually only 2. And I want you to take a look at Genesis 47:18. And it says, when that year came to an end, describing the first year of the famine, the following year, which we can calculate, comes out to 2,238. They came to him, meaning the Egyptians, and said to him, we will not deny the truth to my Lord, and as much as all our money and livestock are gone, we have given them away to Joseph, to Pharaoh, in order to survive, and this was all last year. There is now nothing left to give. And so we have no way to pay for the food other than selling ourselves and our land. So what are they saying here? So apart from the fact that the famine was so terrible, that in 1 year they finished everything, all their possessions. They had sold everything they had. The only thing that was left was they and their land. And these are not just regular folk talking. This is even the nobility in Egypt. They're coming to Joseph and they're saying there's simply not enough. We don't have. The only thing we can give is ourselves. We can sell ourselves as property to Pharaoh, become indentured servants, and give our lands. But apart from that, notice that they said this. When the first year came to an end, when that year came to an end, then there's a second year, and that's it. And after that, there is no more famine. The famine only lasted for 2 years. And the question is, why did it only last for 2 years? How did this suddenly happen? Obviously, I imagine that nobody was angry at Joseph because the famine was so terrible, so destructive, that this was a godsend that it had stopped. Joseph did 2 things that until now have been sort of hush-hush. One of them even came from Pharaoh himself, but Joseph did it the right way. There's a way to do it. The first thing that Joseph did, if you go back to chapter 41, verse 34, there you'll see that when he gave Pharaoh advice on how to conduct Egypt during the plenty, he said, let Pharaoh take steps to appoint officials over the land and prepare Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. Now, the translation here is to prepare Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. But in the Hebrew, it's a little bit different. It says, V'chimesh et ha'aretz. V'chimesh et ha'aretz literally means to divide the earth into fifth parts and to take a fifth part away. That's what it literally means. Rashi doesn't explain it this way, and even the translations don't translate it this way. What the translations say is that here V'chimesh actually means to quickly do all of this, whatever this is. He's not giving his plan away. So it's a very interesting thing. On the one hand, he's telling Pharaoh everything is going to have to be done very quickly, and sort of like in the word quickly itself, he's hiding his plan. And his plan is he's going to take a fifth from everything that's produced, and he's going to store it, a whole fifth. And we said that the problem was, how can you store something for 7 years? That's not going to work very well. But he had a plan, and he knew how to do it. And one of the things that he did was he added earth from where the produce was grown, into the silos where it was stored. And Rashi says that this is one way of preserving the produce. But he did another thing. We'll get back to this in a second. He did another thing. Pharaoh told him, why don't you invite your father and his family here? And Joseph was very happy to do what Pharaoh said. But Joseph did him one better. He didn't just invite his father and his brothers down to live in Egypt during the famine. He also did something else. In chapter 47, verse 7, Joseph then brought his father Jacob and introduced him to Pharaoh. And Jacob greeted Pharaoh. But notice that the Hebrew is very different than the English translation. The Hebrew says, Vayamidehu lifnei paro. He set him in front of Pharaoh. Meaning, think about this. What does this even mean? If you've ever seen how courts are conducted, especially in Africa, but Egypt was no different than that. The way you cannot come walking in to a court with a king. At best, you come down on your knees. Certainly, you can't stand in front of the king. This is not Europe of the Middle Ages, where we imagine that the king was sitting on a throne high above everyone else, and everybody was standing before him, courtesans and courtiers and all that. No, this is Africa. In Africa, you have to come down on your knees. But Joseph did something amazing. Even though it would have been better for Jacob to be sitting down, he stood him up before Pharaoh. The reason he stood him up before Pharaoh was because that was Joseph's secret weapon against the famine. He knew that once Jacob would be higher than Pharaoh, his righteousness would stop the famine. That was his plan. Where did he take this from? Where did he get this idea from? Is a long discussion, but from this the sages learnt that when there is a righteous person, they can nullify negative decrees. So the good things that Joseph, in a certain sense, prophesied or interpreted from the dreams, they all happened. But the negative part didn't. So let's go back to dividing the land into fifths and taking a fifth away. Where did he learn that from? He learned it from Jacob. Where did Jacob ever do anything like this? So when Jacob was running away he was traveling to Haran to find his fortune, to find his wives, he said to God, everything that you will give me, I will give a tenth away. Meaning everything that you give me, I dedicate a tenth to charity. I give it to others. But he said it in a strange way. He said, Aser asrenu lach. Again, it's a strange form of the verb. I will tithe it. It's like how it's translated into English. But tithe, I will tithe it. From this we learn that actually he didn't give 10%, he gave 20%. And because he gave 20%, he became wealthy in Haran, even though he came with nothing at all. The secret of ensuring that what we are able to make in this world is also preserved, this is true both spiritually and physically, is to give 20% away. And that's what Joseph did. He took this secret that he had learned from his father, and he said, if it was good for my father, it's going to be good for the Egyptians as well. And so everything that was, again, he didn't say this to Pharaoh straight out, but he was concealing it in his word, v'chimesh, and you shall take a 20%, even though again it means to do everything quickly. So this 20%, that's exactly what he does at the end of our reading. And he teaches the Egyptians themselves to give 20%. The moment that they start giving 20%, the famine ends. And that's the last verse of the 7th reading, verse 24. When harvest comes, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh doesn't need it to eat it because he has enough of his own. What it means is you're giving it to the state. It's like income tax. It's in order to spread the wealth around, not to keep it in one place. The whole concept of income tax comes from this verse. That you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, so that what should happen? The remaining 4 parts will be yours, for seed, grain for the fields, and for food for yourselves, and for the servants in your households, and for feeding your young children. And they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in my Lord's eyes, and please do as you have said. Let us be serfs to Pharaoh. They're saying in a certain sense that by giving this 20% to Pharaoh to spread around to those who don't have, that's exactly how the famine ended. So there was one part of it was bringing the tzaddik in, bringing Jacob, who's more righteous even than Joseph is, bringing him in. And the tzaddik, as the sage says, he makes a decree and God performs it. God makes a decree and the tzaddik annuls it. Because in the end, the tzaddik is in a certain sense the representative of the mundane world. And when he feels that it's too difficult, he can come to God and say, this is too difficult, the world can't stand what you're doing. And then it stops. But the other part is this idea of giving 20% to charity. And again, a lot of people will say, and this is how it's treated by most, that the very fact that you give 20% back to the state that you live in, to the country that you live in, that in itself is already a form of charity, because it belonged to you, and now you're giving it back. The country doesn't see it that way. It sees it as, we're giving you services, you need to pay for those services, meaning we made it possible for you to make that income, so we want something back. So therefore, apart from that 20%, it's the Jewish custom, even though it's not law, but it's the custom to give 20% away to charity from everything that's from the top. You don't have to take it from after the taxes. It can be from before the taxes, but at least give as much to charity as much as you give to the society that you live in. And that is what ensures that there are no years of famine. That even something that was, again, Joseph built his whole reputation on this, it all ended, it stopped abruptly, and from that moment on, the world was in a better place. So, thanks for joining this week. Sorry about the 4th installment. I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to redo it. The 4th installment was recorded, but I had a phone call again in the middle, and the audio is gone. A lot of people complained, both on YouTube and personally. But there's a link to the article itself if anybody wants to read the article. So, as these are the last moments of 10th of Tevet here in the land of Israel, I wish you all an easy fast if you're fasting, and this should be the last 10th of Tevet that we celebrate this way. The real celebration, as the prophet says, Zechariah says, that the fast of the 10th month, this is the fast of the 10th, it's also on the 10th of Tevet, but this is the 10th month from Nisan, with all the other fasts, shall become days of festivities, of praising God, when the final temple is rebuilt. And the whole idea, again, by the temple is that it's sort of like a lens, that the moment that it's built, again, from goodwill, from all people, from all of humanity, it becomes a lens through which we can see the impact of our good deeds over the last 2,000 years. And the moment that that's seen, that itself changes the entire world in ways that we can only begin to imagine. Imagine if people were surrounded and able to see the goodness around certain people and the lack maybe of the goodness around others, how it would change. We talk about social influence and social ranking or something like that. They have that in China already. Imagine that what they have in China is just the beginning of it. Really what it will look like is that you will know who is a good person. You will be able to just look at the cloud around them, call it, or the intense light coming out from their existence. So in the meantime, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. All the best.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.